I know the kind of pain you're feeling, Alex. I once had it myself.
You some kind of doctor?
No, Alex. I am Magneto, and I have come to offer you sanctuary.
Welcome to the second season of Grounded Futures podcast. This is the show where we discuss topics ranging from climate change to identity to how youth can gain new skills to thrive amid current and ongoing disasters that we are collectively facing. We are your hosts, Liam and Carla.
Hello, and I'm Carla. Yes, we are one Gen X, me, and one Gen Z, Liam, mom and kid. And we're part of the show is we're keen on tearing down the walls between generations together and on our show with our awesome guests. We've shifted the show a little bit. And firstly, Jamie Lee is heading off to co-host a new show coming soon with Melissa. And Joey has gone to university. All the best to Joey, and we'll miss you guys. Another change is we will be digging deeper into topics with each guest, rather than giving kind of the same questions to everybody. And we're super stoked. Grounded Futures is produced on Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh lands, but our guests are from around the world. The music for our show at the beginning and at the end is by Gout, also known as Zach Bergman.
Today we are excited to start our second season off with our dear friend, Nick Montgomery. Nick is an anarchist, theory nerd, and permaculturist. He is currently working with Carla and Jamie Lee to launch Solidarity Housing, a project to transition privately owned houses to permanently affordable homes. He's also starting a nut tree nursery with friends on Denman Island, Comox territory, where he lives. Sometimes he also teaches university courses on environmental politics and climate catastrophe. He loves good conversations, learning and sharing skills, and cooking giant meals. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Thanks.
Yay, welcome, Nick. Yes, we've cooked lots of meals together. And we're just going to get to it. Thanks for being here. So before we even did this podcast, before the pandemic, the three of us, and I think Letitia was involved too, had talked about doing some workshops, particularly for youth, but for community members, about this idea that you mentioned to Liam, and we got really stoked, which is what happens if capitalism can't be stopped? Or I guess more precisely, what happens if climate change can't be stopped? Like what can we do? And because part of the conversation is, based on we got to stop capitalism before we even do anything else. So yeah, we're just hoping that maybe you can unpack that a bit for us and maybe talk a bit about what we were going to do for the workshop. I know you held one of these at the Anarchist Book Fair in 2019. So yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think about this conversation. My memory of it is that we were talking about, the desire we have to stop capitalism and end capitalism, and also kind of thinking about that in the context of climate doom and catastrophe and all that. And yeah, that's still something that I'm thinking lots about these days. And I'm doing a seminar at UVic this fall on climate catastrophe and I've kind of been trying to figure out what the dominant thing on climate catastrophe is right now. And it seems like one version is, rah, we can stop climate change. We can just get world leaders to agree on emission targets. And then there's kind of like, maybe we can't stop it, but look at these hopeful stories of nice things that people are doing. Electric cars are nice and all that. And then there's kind of like Roy Scranton and these kind of famous people who are like, we're doomed, climate is inevitable, and we should think about that and kind of reflect on it while we sip our coffees. And so I was wanting to have a conversation that was kind of like coming from a different perspective and saying, what if we can't stop climate change and capitalism? but reframing it in terms of that the coming disaster is basically just an intensification of colonialism and capitalism. Like it's more of the disaster that we've been living in for 500 years. And the conversation that we had at the book fair a couple of years ago came out of this zine called Desert that was written, I looked it up, and it's written actually 10 years ago now, in 2011. And at that time, it was this super controversial zine because it was basically saying, like, we can't stop climate change. It's not going to happen. We're not going to stop it. They're not going to stop pumping oil and burning carbon. And this thing is already out of control. And at that time, it was this super, like, it was deeply problematic to even be reading and talking about this zine. And people argued that it was genocidal to say and think that. And now it's kind of normal to think that. Like I introduced this zine at the beginning of a class that I taught last year to my environmental studies students. And I was like, what do you think, guys? Like, what if we can't stop climate change? And they were all like, yep. You know? Not a controversial thing anymore. And so I guess the thing that I'm trying to think about now is basically climate doomerism is mainstream. A certain version of it is mainstream. Like, there's doomers writing in the New York Times and the Rolling Stone magazine. And the dominant order's new paradigm is adaptation and resilience. And so empires trying to figure out how to adapt to climate change. And I guess to go back to the desert thing, the thing that I like about the zine that I think is useful is they want to talk about the promise of what they call active disillusionment with the dominant way of life and dominant forms of activism. So they're saying, if we give up on this, you know, trying to reduce carbon emissions, then we could think concretely about like what it means to confront what's coming as radicals. And I guess that to me is where like I would start the conversation. And so in this class, the seminar that I'm doing in the fall, we're going to talk about, you know, conventional agriculture is going to become way more difficult because rainfall patterns are going to be uneven. And in like where we live in the Pacific Northwest, there's going to be drought for like 3, 4, 5 months of the year. And so how do you transition towards perennial agriculture, and how do you store as much water as possible? Another thing is increasingly like the state and capitalism are basically just going to abandon some areas. And, you know, they already do this to cities, especially poor cities with surplus populations. And so what do you do when the pipes and the electricity breaks down? And how do you actually live without police and grocery stores and Amazon and all that stuff if you're in one of those places where the state and capitalism has abandoned? But in other places, like I think maybe in a place like Vancouver or where I'm living on a Gulf island, they probably aren't going to abandon this place because there's a pretty docile population and a mild climate, and you know, cops have a pretty good foothold here, and so there's still going to be landlords and developers and cops and prisons and borders and Netflix and smartphones. And so to me, the thing that I've been thinking about lately is the scariest future, the most depressing, scariest future for me, for this region, is that we become like a fortress playground for the world's elite. That's like full climate doom to me is the scariest scenarios. It's not that like, oh my God, we have to figure out how to get our own water. It's that they actually don't leave and we become like the inside of a little fortress.
Right, yeah.
Wow.
Another thing that I want to talk about in this class is, like, I think another thing that's going to happen, that's already happening in climate catastrophe is a lot of really pissed off, entitled, mostly white middle-class people who have been promised jobs and pensions and new cars and high standards of living, and that dream is crumbling, right? Like capitalism can't sustain a big middle class in North America anymore. And this is where fascism comes from, arguably, right? So I listened to this podcast where this guy, there was this nerdy academic who did all this statistics stuff on the January insurrection, the right-wingers who took over Parliament. And apparently, like, he broke it down in terms of counties, and a lot of the people who participated came specifically from counties where middle class incomes were in decline. And so there's like this really direct correlation between people losing their kind of like middle class dream and moving towards the right. And to me, that means that as radicals, we need to be offering a different exit from middle class life, right? Like, how do you say, like, yeah, you're not going to be able to have a single family home and 2 cars and a new sofa from the Brick every 5 years, but like, we could have a pretty cool life. It just looks a lot different. And so I think that, to me, is the general thing. Is that's why all this autonomy and the creation of alternatives and prefiguration are so important. Is if we aren't already practicing other ways of living and growing food and taking care of each other, then to people who experience the abandonment by capitalism, there's just this terrifying void. There's like, oh my God, I have nothing if I don't have my job. And then those people are going to be willing to do pretty much anything to get their next job, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, did you want to say more?
Well, I just want to hear what you two think about this stuff.
Well, the exit, I love the articulation of exit plan. I was like, first thing that came to mind was the, exit through the gift shop. It's like, I think you could come up with a clever play on that, because it's like an exit from consumer culture almost, right? I think that's really cool. And it kind of leads to our next question that Liam's going to ask in a second. But this idea of, like one of the rhetorics that's going around right now is that the youth today are, like all youth are more radical today than they've ever been. And I think that that's a mistake for a lot of reasons. And Liam's going to speak to a bit more why. But one of the things that got piqued in my mind when you said that is that I have friends who teach in universities and colleges in the US, and a lot of their students are fascists. Like this whole idea that that kids are just out of the blue become radicalized, and that's not actually how it happens. And it's like years and years and years of activists who have worked to open up dialogues and get other stories out. And we just all have more information today than we ever had. But it's a very white, privileged position to take. Black youth in the 60s, radical, super radical, super aware. Anyway, so
you're gonna slowly start just.
I know I'm gonna let Liam take it off.
She's slowly just starting to just say my entire question
because it's a rant.
Anyways, so yeah, on that, I guess it's like the other reason to create that workshop was I and a few other youth in our lives were feeling very frustrated with some of the rhetoric going around about kids and the limited way youth are allowed to be activists. Some of the rhetoric swarming us around is kids know more today than ever. Youth are much more radical today, or the least favorite. Kids today are going to save us. Just overall the expectations that are put on youth today and stuff like that. And I think it's a terrible thing because that's been happening forever anyways, but it's become way more recently. And I think the internet's a big part of that. So we think part of this gets caught up in the individual rights rhetoric of liberalism. Can you explain your thoughts on the entanglement of individualism and rights? And maybe then explain what autonomy is and why you prefer it to liberation or rights.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I like that question. But I'm going to ask you at the end to say more about the connection between kids, because I haven't thought as much about that. But I guess...
Wait, I could say something that might help that I realized we should have said.
Yeah.
And I think just listening to Liam, because we talk about this a lot, and just when you're recording a show, things get a little bit, especially when you're in the host position, like you lose some of that flow of that awesome conversation happens. And one of the things that Liam talks about is that, youth are told that they have more rights today, and that they, they're more radical, and it's so cool that they're going to save us. They're going to save the planet. They're our greatest hope. But alongside that narrative, of course, is that they don't have much power or autonomy. And it's like a hypocrisy. And I think there's something there around rights and actual autonomy and power. And it's just part of empire, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the rights thing, I don't really like the concept of rights. I think partly because they originate with empires. So like the earliest rights are granted by emperors way back, I don't know, 2,500 years ago or something. And they always refer to a central authority, right? So your rights are granted to you by a state or some other institution, and that the state protects your rights. But inherent in saying the state protects your rights is like the state can also take those rights away. That's the thing that's always there, right? And so ultimately, if we're in a rights-based framework, we're dependent on whoever guarantees our right to whatever it is. And I think some people who are really into the rights-based framework would say that it's more fuzzy, like it's like a moral right. So I was listening to this podcast or this conversation the other day about trying to promote housing as a human right. And, it's promoting this vision of society where everyone has housing. And ultimately, I want to live in a world where everyone has housing. But I think the rights-based framework isn't the problem that I have with it. Is ultimately it makes housing an entitlement, right? It's like I have a right to housing, which means there's someone out there, some magical institution or person who has to give me housing. But who is it that gives it to me? And usually it's some government or institution, right? And so I think the alternative to that is not being dependent on a government institution. And that would mean, in terms of housing, we actually have the capacity to take care of each other. That would be a kind of autonomous housing thing, right? Where we, whoever we are, the community or our little group, we actually have a capacity to build and maintain housing. We don't have a right to it. No one's guaranteeing our right to it. We just actually know how to build and live in and fix up our house. And the other part that then is exciting to me about the more autonomy-oriented framework is that it kind of it at least opens space for the fact, and maybe makes it really obvious that, well, that would look totally different in different places. So some places maybe we all live in big communal houses, and other places we live in tiny little homes. We use different building materials, and we organize the work of repairing things and working on housing differently. And I think a lot of that gets lost in the right to housing, because housing just becomes this thing that I'm entitled to, and someone has to give it to me. And I guess I was trying to think about this in relation to the stuff about kids and youth, and I think part of it is in terms of what you folks are saying. A lot of the stuff I hear is oh, kids are so well informed today, and they have access to so much information, and Greta Thunberg is out there speaking truth to power, and it's all about consciousness. I'm not trying to bash Greta, but I would bash the way that she's like positioned by elites, because the function that she plays is like she is this kind of moral voice, and people listen and they clap and they say, oh, you're so powerful, and the youth climate movement is so powerful, and it's saying, well, oh yeah, the youth are so informed and they're educating us and they're like, telling us to do stuff, and so on the one hand, it's kind of making kids and youth responsible for educating us or educating boomers or whoever. But on the other hand, I think, and maybe this is the other thing you were getting at, is that it's all about words and rhetoric and morality, and it's not about actually what would our kids and youth role be in actually shaping, like, how do we get our stuff? How do we grow food? How does the whole world freaking work? And that's what's causing climate change. And youth actually don't have a much role in that at all.
Also, I think the whole thing of like, youth have more information and stuff like that. The thing is, because the internet, it's not like a lot of us seek out this information. It's that it's forced down. All the information that's happening in the world are forced down youth's throat now. And really, at the end of the day, we're not all radical, because only a couple or only like a few the people, like groups of youth, are gonna actually take those information in and do something about it. The other half read it, get annoyed, and then go down a different path and become terrible. That's
Totally.
The thing, is that it's just, oh, we have more information. That does not make us radical. That just means, okay, now we know these things. Yeah. Most of us don't do anything with it though. And that's that's kind of the thing I was thinking about with the internet now being involved.
Mm-hmm.
Because before it was like kids had to kind of search out information, it's like you're going to go physically read a book, or you're going to go physically read the newspaper or something like that. Other youth didn't have to, but now that we're all on the internet, it's just like you just open up one app and instantly you're given information about what's happening in the world, and not everyone takes that well.
Right. Yeah. And part of it. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I can.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, I totally agree, and I think a big part of that is like information can be overwhelming. Like there's this assumption that, oh, the more information you have, the more better informed you are. But like, if you wake up every morning and you do the like doom scroll and just like look at all the disasters that are happening in the world, you're just gonna feel anxiety and hopelessness and powerlessness. And so a lot of information is set up, I think, to feel like overwhelming and to drive anxiety. And I'm curious about, because you're deeper in the like internet worlds than I am. Like, how do you navigate that?
Well, I think my thing as well is that, youth are expected now to like save the world and do all these things. Well, also at the same time, we're kids. Our, everything about our hormones, everything, we cannot be in the front lines healthily. If we're in the front lines, it's not going to be that easy, because a lot of us are going through heavy hormones and heavy just things happening in life anyways. And this expectation on us to do all these things actually is more damaging to us. And what ends up happening, I've had some of my friends feel guilt because they're not in the front lines. When they're kids, they shouldn't feel that guilt at all. They literally, some of them can't. They don't have the ability to be able to be in the front lines of all these huge radical activist things or whatever, like so many of my friends have literally had heavy guilt that they can't do more than just donate to things or something like that. And that's because adults are putting now pressure on us. And that's why so many kids end up lashing out and not being radical anymore, because they're being forced to do all these things that the government doesn't actually allow them to even do in the first place.
Yeah, or they're grappling with so much stress with school and with not maybe a good home life, and they don't have much autonomy. And I think there's like it's a lie. right? It's a
Exactly.
lie. And some kids do have that support from loving relationships, but like just the pressure of doing well in school or whatever, it's a lot to contend with. And I don't know if this is a stretch, but it also is wrapped up in ageism too, even having this position about kids no more today. I was thinking about it around feminism, around women. It'd be like if someone said, this would not go over well. If someone said today, wow, women today are just smarter. Hey, like they're just so much smarter. Like, look how many more women there are that run things. And like, they're just more informed. Like there's even like presidents who are women. Like, wow, like we would lose it. Like feminists would be like, what? Women have always been smart. It's called patriarchy. Why they weren't doing. So it's kind of similar.
It's the same thing.
I think so. I think it's
kids have always been radical and kids have always been smart and all these things, but ageism made it.
My favorite Ursula K. Le Guin said in The Dispossessed, kids are natural anarchists because anybody who lives under domination is going to move from a place from grassroots, from bottom up.
Yeah, I mean, like,
right?
Bad things that kids end up learning, they're taught that by adults. Most of us, it's not like some of us maybe do pick up a book and suddenly decide to become fascists, but half the time it's an adult teaching you to become that. It's not actually
that's 50% of the internet or more is grooming and courting kids into fascism.
Well, that's the thing. Racism you're not born with racism, you're taught it. So, that's the same thing with everyone. Actually, at the end of the day, like adults telling youth that, oh, you guys are going to save us is actually just them being lazy and not wanting to do anything anymore. They're like, you guys take care of it. We don't want to do anything anymore. It's whatever. It's like, you taught us all these things though, so we still need the support,
Liam and Carla rant. It's also part of the rhetoric of it's just the right thing to say, right? All my hopes in kids. And so like that, my kind read is that it's just a reflexive response. It's not necessarily steeped in all this nuance or thought. It's just a reflexive response.
Escapism thing. They just don't want to deal with anything else.
Probably we could all do better if, like, whenever we're thinking of, like, hey, I'm going to say a fact that encompasses an entire identity category, maybe just like, don't say it. Don't say it.
Well, I do that. I ask people to replace kid with any other identity grouping with their statement and see how terrible it is. And instantly they all go, holy shit. I'm like, yeah.
Definitely. They just need discipline. This is maybe getting us off topic, but
that's good.
Is reminding me that, like, when you were talking about, people picking up a book and becoming fascist or whatever makes people slide towards the right. One of the things that I feel like I have been noticing is that, like, a lot of dominant institutions have taken up a lot of kind of previously radical ideas, like, anti-oppressive language and consent and feminism. And so now it's like these pretty boring university type institutions offering this framework to young people, like schools and universities are promoting this. And that opens the door for these right wingers to then occupy the place of, like, oh, do you want to be a bit subversive? You want to be a bit, like, sneaky? You want to, like, go against the grain? How about try being a bigot? And I have this worry that the alt-right has found this position that's like, yeah, it's a bit playful, it's jokey, it's subversive, and because institutions have kind of taken up the language of the left, a lot of left-wing or previously radical ideas kind of get associated with norminess and what you should do. And yeah, I don't know. I want to hear your thoughts on that.
I don't know. I was just
no, it's true. It's I mean, not to get into a binary, but there is like a pendulum thing happening, and the institutions too are like, I don't know if this is even what you're trying to say, but like they're rotten in and of themselves. So, that all makes sense to me. Did you want to? I know Zach always jokes about like that kids, a teenager living in suburbia in 1980 knowing about the Sandinistas. Now that's radical. Right? That's like doing the work and like figuring shit out. I don't know. I don't have all the answers, but I do know I get frustrated with that rhetoric. And I think thinking deeply about the individualism part and the rights part entangled in there is really important. So thanks for opening that up for us. I loved it. Hello, this is our Delighting in Our Friends short interlude. This month, we are thrilled to highlight our friend Time, also known as Chris Time Still. Time is a co-learner, hip-hop artist, journalist, storyteller, and writer. He is the host of my favorite podcast, Time Talks, and you can find him on Twitter at Time Raps. The song we're going to highlight today is his piece called Barrel of a Pen, and we are especially honored because this song has not been released yet, so you can only listen to it on this show, for now anyways.
Yes, we chose this song and Time's work because his songs untangle the most complex ideas and histories that we have grappled with for centuries, amplifying and unearthing the most important issues we are collectively facing.
Time's unique ability to poetically weave the past and present is an invitation to us all to feel things anew and then go out and act. And given that it's the 20th anniversary of 9/11 and just the ongoing brutal wars that the USA enacts, Barrel of a Pen continues Time's necessary and powerful work to set some records straight.
Exactly, and this song also connects to our conversation in this episode. Because forever, most youth, and this is very true for me, we learn a lot about what's happening or has happened through radical songs and other pop culture works like movies, books, anime, and so on.
Okay, so here we are delighting, and here is Barrel of a Pen, written by Time and produced by Awareness. They also co-create works under the name Calm. Check out their work over at Bandcamp, and we'll put all the links in our show notes. For now, turn it up, sit back, and listen.
Yeah. Instead of listening to sugar hell, these kids sniffing it. Instead of living in ecstasy, they're just tripping it. I said put down the Percocets, Vicodin to listen, kids. This is history without the patriotic trifling myth in it. Columbus brought the slave trade in 1492 with the doctrine of discovery and genocide too. Then the English came with Jamestown and Plymouth. Thanksgiving was a massacre, now it's a holiday gimmick. White supremacy was a lie, slaves built the White House. They don't talk about Kemet, history they just white out. In 1801 the US fought Tripoli. This was before the coup in 2011 with Obama and Hillary. Lincoln wanted to send slaves to Liberia and Colombia. 1898 US took Hawaii, money's number one. Then we killed 200,000 in the Philippines. Then we took Puerto Rico and put the rebels in the guillotine. 1915 occupied and beheaded Haitians. 27 Nicaragua gave the landscape a facelift. Cootie ran in 53 with Operation Ajax. Coup Guatemala, United Fruits said where's the safe at? Guyana in 53, Iraq and DR in 63, Cambodia, Laos and Vietnam into the 70s, Ecuador in the 60s, along with the Congo, JFK crew Brazil, where Wall Street built condos. Then came Cuba coup and assassination attempts, Bolivia in 64 to show them what the SOA meant. East Timor was massacred in 1965, Ghana in 66 with Kissinger's lies. 73, Chile was cool on 9/11, Grenada was 83, Fiji was 87, Nicaragua in 81, Panama in 89, Afghanistan and Iraq, are we all blind? Drone wars, killing citizens abroad, we're starving kids in Yemen, where they blame Assad. Truth only comes from the barrel of a pen, and I got a notebook loaded for all of them. Truth only comes from the barrel of a pen, and Bobby got a notebook for all of them.
And now, back to our show.
Loved it. We're going to kind of get a little bit more into you now and pivot a bit. And yeah, we're just curious if you could share when you first became, about when did you first become active in organizing and connected? How have your ideas changed or shifted over the years? And, what ideas are kinetic?
Yeah. I guess my first experience of doing kind of activisty stuff was probably in university, and it's pretty dorky and liberal. My friends and I started a chapter of Oxfam at Queen's University, which is like, if people don't know, Oxfam's like a international NGO that does human rights work and is concerned about poverty and shit like that. And they have these campaigns, like campaigns against sweatshops and the arms trade and stuff like that. And a bunch of my friends were in development studies and were kind of like, concerned about these issues and wanted to do a thing that wasn't just going to class. And so we started this Oxfam chapter. But one of the things that was interesting about it is, so you start a chapter of Oxfam at a university. Basically, you're supposed to sit behind a table and like, hey, you have a little form that people can sign up for the newsletter and they can donate. And that's what it means to have a chapter of Oxfam. But my friends, they had, I don't know exactly where, but had done a bunch of stuff around consensus-based decision-making. And so they horizontalized the whole organization. We made all of our decisions by consensus, and also flattened the organization. And so it's supposed to be like, there's supposed to be an executive that's, the president and vice president and treasurer and all that shit. And then there's the like general membership, who are just the people getting ordered around by the executive. And they actually inverted that so that basically the purpose of the executive was like bookkeepers, and the membership are the ones who decide what they're going to do. And then the other thing that we did, and I think this was other people's, I think I was more of a follower at the time because all this stuff was new to me, but a lot of the projects that we did were prefigurative projects. And so there was like, we were supposed to do this. One of the big campaigns at the time was against sweatshops. And so again, to stop sweatshops, you're supposed to have a table with Oxfam and people sign up and eventually maybe donate, and that you send money to somewhere else, and that is supposed to stop sweatshops. But instead of doing that, we basically organized a free clothing swap. So, whoever want to stop sweatshops, stop buying from sweatshops, get used clothes. And so that really was a big impact on me of just seeing how like prefigurative projects are not disconnecting the means from the ends of stuff started to feel really important to me, and seeing consensus-based decision making and also just like skilled facilitation. Like there were a couple of people in the group who were really skilled facilitators. Kind of helped me see how like, oh, wow, we can actually just make decisions together where no one's in charge, and it's actually really functional, and you get better ideas and people are more motivated than when it's just one person bossing everyone around. So that was like definitely a kind of early transformative thing for me. And then I think another big change at around the same time was like I was really invested in liberalism and like changing the world and making the world a better place, and encountered people like Gustavo Esteva and Richard Day, who helped me basically see how the very idea of like changing the whole world is linked to the project of capitalism and colonialism, and it comes out of the West and the whole idea that we can know the whole world and control it and change it, and that the fixation on the global and the universal and world change, comes out of that kind of Western colonized thinking. And that is an idea for sure that continues to be kinetic, and it helps me just kind of organize like why I'm so annoyed at so much of what happens in dominant politics, like the elections right now. It's just like people are so fixated on the elections, and there's so much energy and money being directed towards it, and it's totally divorced from what's happening in our everyday lives. And I think, like in the context of climate, probably the ultimate right now is carbon emissions. So there's this idea of carbon emissions, and it's like there's units of carbon. They can exist anywhere in the world. We can do math to figure out how many there are and how they should go down. And the whole concept is totally placeless. Like it has nothing to do with social relations. It doesn't have anything to do with ecosystems or where we live or what we're doing with our lives. And so, I think I got really interested, not just in how, like Richard Day calls it, the hegemony of hegemony, that it's not just that there's this idea that we should change the world, but that idea of changing the world is dominant. So, and part of that is that there's this blackmail against the local. So either you're doing this big change, you're influencing the course of the election or policy or some dominant institution, or what you're doing is just not really very important. And I kind of think it's the opposite, that basically the most important thing that I think that's happening is people creating local autonomous projects, reshaping their everyday lives, and creating networks between those projects and relationships. So that is still a set of ideas that's really dear to me. And then I guess that another big shift was meeting Carla and all the folks at the Thistle, and just getting invited to think more deeply about generosity and trust. And, I was a sad militant at the time, or rigid radical, or whatever you want to call it. And was good at having the most radical things to say, and good at bashing people for saying the wrong things. And I made a lot of projects happen, but didn't do a great job of tending relationships and making people feel welcome in spaces, and making people feel trusted and cared for. Because I was kind of like, oh, that's hippie values. That's not like, I'm an anarchist. And so I think, that was another big change, and one that I'm still working on. Like, I think probably will be a lifelong thing of working on that. And it's kind of the least, I feel like it's not as, there's not a lot of fancy theory things to say about it. Like, be kind, trust people, help people feel cared for and connected. It's a really good idea. It helps other people do the same thing if you do it. But it's also really hard to do that as somebody socialized into heteropatriarchy and whiteness and all that stuff. So,
Sounds a little nutty to me. How anarchy of you. Oh, that was lovely. It's funny that you say that, because I remember going over and giving a talk about the Thistle to one of your classes before we ever met, and you just beamed delight and hospitality, because I don't like giving talks in front of people, and I particularly didn't then, and I was really nervous and didn't want to be there, and your joy and excitement for everything I was saying was, it was the seeds for our friendship. And so I think that like I have a friend who I always talk about, like, oh, that person planted seeds, or they show me the thing, but he rephrases it as that it sounds like they watered your seeds. And I really like that nuance, because I think like you, I mean, I didn't know you really before, but I think you came, and we've talked about this, and I've talked about a lot, that I don't think it's something you can train, because like you said, there isn't a theoretical big backdrop, and it's like it's such a affectual way of being in a relationship, and it's something you work on all your life, and it's subtle. And yeah, I just wanted to reflect back to you that I think that the seeds were sprouting already.
Thanks. Yeah, we watered each other's seeds.
Yeah, totally.
Nice.
And for our listeners that don't know, Nick is the co-author to the book Joyful Militancy that he and I wrote together, which we really tried to tackle this stuff in a kind of theoretical way.
Yeah, cool. The next questions are all very chill ones now. Now we're leaving the
theory.
Yeah, and now we're just doing our regular questions. So with that, do you have a favorite word these days? Something that captures how you feel or think about things, or in general, just one word, any really. It could be 2 words, I don't know.
A phrase.
Yeah.
I like that question. Yeah, I chose patterning.
Ooh.
And partly I started, my partner Letitia and I started using it because she hates hiking, like passionately hates hiking, and all like hiking culture, and people going for hikes on day trips and all that. But she actually really likes walking around in the forest. And so we had to make up another word. So we weren't like, oh, do you want to go for a hike? It was like, no, we're going to, and the word that we chose is patterning, because we were like, okay, like we're permaculture nerds, and so we're trying to notice patterns while we're walking, and we're learning stuff, and we're also creating our own patterns, and wanted to create this idea of like, yeah, a pattern as a verb, that you develop processes that repeat themselves. And then I want to say one more thing about this. I was listening to this podcast the other day. I think it's called Economics for Emancipation. And the guests on it were Elena Latona and Gopal Jayaneni. And they had this amazing quote that it also made me think of. And they said, what we feed grows, what we grow, we will love, and what we love, we will protect. And that's actually a strategy. That's not just a nice thing to think about. It's a strategy. And I love that idea that patterns of practice are what we repeat when things get hard. And so if you practice, hierarchy and patriarchy and anxiety, then that's going to come out when shit hits the fan. And if you practice deep compassion and care, and you're connected to a sense of purpose, then that's what's going to repeat itself.
Oh, I really like that word.
Yeah, pattern. I mean, both of that. That was beautiful. Thanks for sharing that quote. But I love your word. I love when we purposing words, and that world. And we need to do world building, but we need to do word building. And I think it's a big part of, which kind of leads to our next question about thrive resistance, the ability to thrive while resisting, particularly for young people. But as a doomer with a sense of humor, for all our listeners, Nick is really funny. You could do satire, and I think you should tell us a joke. Do you have a joke to share with us?
Oh yeah, I got a joke for you.
Cool. Seriously, no one laughs. I'm going to put me on mute because it might be bad. Okay, Nick's going to tell us a joke, and then we're going to ask you the question.
Okay, what did 1 say to the 11? Hey, who's your friend? What did 0 say to the 8? Nice belt.
Spelt. The thing is, they're all just like dad jokes, but they're hilarious.
Nick is like a millennial who's really a boomer.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So what are, I know you have, we talked about in your bio that you have a nursery for trees, and Orwell would be so proud. Do you know that he thought it was the most important thing you could do was to plant trees, particularly nut and fruit trees. He had his own nut and fruit trees. A lot of people don't know that about Orwell, but yeah, because that's all that matters. Well, it's not all that matters, but in terms of like food, it's an important one. So yeah, maybe I have a feeling this might fit into there, but what are some of the ways you cultivate thriving in the everyday?
Yeah, I think, well, definitely being silly generally, and like humor and funniness, and being able to have dark humor and being able to make fun of myself. Increasingly, I recognize how important it is to humor. And, I meet people and they can be all kinds of amazing things, and really smart and really wonderful and caring. But if we can't laugh together, like if they're not funny or they don't think I'm funny, then I'm kind of like, we probably are not going to be like really close friends. Because I just, it's so important to me. And it's a way that I kind of try to create ease. Because I can be a pretty like anxious, shy, dorky person. And if I use laughter to kind of like help with that. And it's also important to me to be able to like make fun of myself. Like I'm not quite a hoarder, but I love accumulating things. Like my latest one, I was forced to throw this away, but I kept a rotten, broken birdhouse for a year.
Oh, wow.
Because I was going to fix it. That in scare quotes, but just stuff like that. That it's like, it's I'm a ridiculous person. We're all ridiculous people, and I love being able to remember that.
Yeah, I think that's great. I love when you have like a friend where you're both able to kind of make fun of each other a little bit, but that it's all under love and it's a joke, and there's all these kind of, like that relationship with someone where you're both able to joke about like, terrible things that happen to each other, or just stupid things that each other do, or like having that friend where you both have similar bad things that you happened when you were younger, but you both are able to joke about it in this really lighthearted way. I think that's actually a huge healing process for a lot of people, is being able to joke. Like people think that making jokes off your trauma or something is like bad coping mechanism. I think it's an amazing coping mechanism, because especially if you're doing it with another person, because then it takes all the weight off of the problem, and then because that you're actually able to work through it.
And it like for me, it makes me feel seen when when Carla makes fun of me. I'm like, oh, you see me, you see all the weird weird shit that I do, and I can like laugh. Other people can laugh at me, and I can laugh at myself, and it is an indicator to me in like friendship that I'm close with someone. When they can poke fun at me and I can poke fun.
Well, as soon as you can bully your friends, then you're close.
Yeah, the word is consent.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that.
Yeah.
We're gonna get onto some like recommendations and stuff, but before we do you want to say anything about what you're working on or plug anything?
Well, I am helping to. I feel like you kind of dropped the hint about our nursery, and so with some friends, I am starting a nut tree nursery. It's going to be called Nutcase Nursery, making a case for edible nut trees.
Nice.
I wish I could say the website, but it's not quite up yet. But maybe I can let you know when it is and put it in the show notes or something.
Totally.
And we're really excited to be growing hardy nut trees and I think I got really excited about fruit trees when I was first into permaculture, and fruit trees are cool, but like how many apples can you really eat? Like once you have one fruit tree, that's like hundreds of apples. But nuts, like especially for vegans and vegetarians, they're like this incredible source of protein. And even if you do eat meat, they're like potentially a major replacement for a lot of grain that's going to be increasingly difficult to grow. And so like hazelnuts, you can press and make really amazing oil out of them. Chestnuts, you can dry and turn into really amazing nutrient dense grain. And so they are this food that for lots of people throughout history have been like this really central staple crop, and now are kind of thought of as like, oh, that's like a nice treat or dessert, or you put in baked goods or whatever. But we're trying to make the case that actually like nut trees could be a really serious part of our diets.
Yeah,
Definitely, yeah.
yeah, it's really cool. Yeah, we'll definitely put in the show notes. I'm excited to get all nutty about it with you.
Yeah.
Never gonna be old.
Yeah, that's really cool. So I guess then we can go into our last questions. Who are some of your favorite authors, books, or comic books, musicians, movies, podcasts, whatever? Which ones would you recommend to youth to gain inspiration from, or that inspired you? Feel free to name a few.
Oh, yeah,
Easy question.
Yeah.
We could do a whole podcast on this.
Yeah, I mean, as long as I get to say more than one, then it's...
Yes.
Yeah, of course. I said a few.
I mean, I would start with Ivan Illich, Tools for Conviviality, one of my faves. Yay. I don't actually think Illich is a very good writer. He's like he's really polemical and like kind of meandering, and as somebody who's like a theorist and is looking for concepts, I'm like, okay, but could you just say what you mean by conviviality? Like, he just gives example after example. Do
you remember? Do you remember when we asked all the Illich people, which I like to call them that, Illich scholars who and were friends about conviviality, and none of them could give us a direct answer, like none of them. And they've like written books and books and books.
Yeah.
Just wanted to point that out.
Yeah. It's like, oh, you know, when you see it, conviviality, yeah. But it is in there somewhere. And I do love that book, and conviviality is a very important concept to me, even though I don't know what it means. Nobody knows. It's really good.
Great word. I don't know what it means, but great word.
No, okay, I'm gonna try. It means that you have to say a bunch of stuff.
I know we do it really good in Joyful Medicines.
Yeah, just read our books.
Just read their books. I recommend that book. Yeah,
no, I think it's basically it goes back to the dependence thing, where like in the housing example that we were talking about, you know, we're dependent on all these dominant institutions and industrial processes to build our housing, and that means that we're totally detached from the capacity to take care of and build our own housing. And so a convivial tool in that context would be the thing that helps us actually bring it down to a human scale and be like, oh, we can actually build our own housing out of materials that we can get ourselves and mill ourselves and make ourselves. And it brings things down to a human scale. And Illich wants to talk about how there's like a really deep freedom or capacity that comes from actually knowing how to take care of what's around you and other people and the place you live, and that a lot of that is being lost. Like, you know, it was being lost in the 70s when Illich was writing, and it still is being lost, but is also being kind of like constantly recovered. And that's what that book is. Another book that I would put up top, partly because not a lot of people know about it, it's called Bolo Bolo by this person named PM. And I don't know if PM has written other stuff, and it's this little known book written in the 80s. But it's really cool and different from other books because it's kind of a utopia. So it's this sort of like vision of the future that's a utopia, But the premise of the utopia is like, what if we managed to destroy the state and capitalism and had the minimum agreement of like, we're going to allow for maximum autonomy and people have all kinds of different ways of living. And we'll just have a few things that will make sure that the state and capitalism will never come back. And so they go through like a bolo is basically like a society, and it can't get too big. And if it gets too big, then it splits in two or whatever. People figure out what to do. But there's all these things that are built in to make sure that you never end up with like a new state or a new capitalism arising. And it's just got weird imaginative stuff. Like everyone gets their own little box, and that's where you can put your like private property. But all your private property has to fit in this like thing that's like a bit bigger than a toolbox or something. And like no one else can look in your box, but you can show people what's in your box if you want to. And it's just like these funny, elaborate, like you can have duels with people. Anyway, read Bolo Bolo. That's one that I think is great. The Invisible Committee to Our Friends. Carla says they're arrogant, which is true.
Wait, I'm very prudent about my opinion about them.
Okay. Sorry. You can edit that out.
I really appreciate their work, and that they're embedded in community and do good work on the ground, and it seems very kinetic. I do find that the way that in which they get their message across can be alienating at times, and maybe not as friendly as I would like it to be. It's my mark.
That's very diplomatic. I'll say I think they can be arrogant.
Yeah, that's your own.
I'll put myself on the record.
Yeah, don't put the blame on someone else.
Anonymous Invisible Committee, whoever you are. But I don't know. I think you kind of like to do that tone of like, we got some brilliant analysis that anyone in the world should want to read. Maybe you have to be a bit arrogant. I don't know. So that's another one that I really like their writing, and that they're trying to do this, like deal with pretty heavy theoretical concepts, but always use kind of examples. And one thing that I think is not arrogant about their writing that I really love is all of their stuff is basically based on the premise that like, you already get this, like you already live this. And we're just making some shit explicit and offering some concepts that are tools to like, you know, maybe sharpen focus a little bit, but it's like, we're all living in this shit pile already. And like, you know. And I kind of like that premise of like, theory is all about kind of like, you already know, we all already know. Mm-hmm. And I just have like some words that help me organize some of the stuff I know into piles or something.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, no, I appreciate their work. I just don't find it as inviting.
Yeah. Fair. And speaking of those kinds of people that do the like we all already know move, I really love Fred Moten. Mm-hmm. I wish that I could recommend The Undercommons as a book, but I don't understand that book. It's difficult for me to understand. Mm-hmm. And most of his writing is actually too difficult for me to understand. But if you just go on YouTube and look up Fred Moten, holy mackerel, he just explains his ideas so much more simply. And he's also just this like delightful person that is so kind and so brilliant and so good at kind of like taking really complex theory stuff and just not explaining it, but just using it. Like, it's like he's like a jazz musician, and theory is jazz. And he's just like, oh yeah, let's play. If you want to play, we can play together.
Totally.
That's really cool.
I agree. I like his talks better.
I got more. Can I keep going?
Yeah.
I've really been enjoying listening to Margaret Killjoy's podcast, Live Like the World is Dying. Great doomer podcast. As she talks about, there's just not a lot of doomer prepper stuff by any left-wingers or anarchists. And so, yeah, I've been enjoying listening to that, like practical stuff, but also kind of thoughts about what it means to really think through climate catastrophe. I have fiction. I don't read a lot of fiction, but I read a couple of amazing fiction books. One, since I'm a tree nerd, The Overstory. I can't remember who the author is, but it won like a Pulitzer, so it's The Overstory. Holy crap, that book, if you want to love trees even more than you already do, it's incredible.
Nice.
And then I guess I'm still really into zine culture. I know some people think that died with photocopiers or whatever, but there are still photocopiers and there are still zines. And one of my favorite zines of all time is called The Next Eclipse. And it's written by some people, I can't remember where they live, but it's a really beautiful vision of autonomy and has kind of like a little kind of utopian vignette about what it could mean to live in autonomy that I find really compelling.
Mm-hmm.
And there's another great zine by Plan C called We're All Very Anxious. And one of the only zines I've found that talks about anxiety from like a thinking theory, connecting it to capitalism.
Oh, that's cool.
That's cool. Definitely a good recommendation. So is it Richard Powers who wrote that book?
The Overstory?
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Anything else?
N.K. Jemisin, Broken Earth Trilogy. So good. Yeah, just so good on so many levels, but I love how like it's like hurt people or whatever that phrase is at like the level of civilizations and centuries. And it's just really powerful. Yeah.
Oh, I like that articulation. Hari Alluri, when he asked me, did you name Silver Threads after that series? And I was like, not consciously, but 100% yes. Totally. It's funny, hey, how those things get in. Yeah. I mean, I always name all my threads is always in titles of things I do, but the silver thread part, yeah. Yeah, I love those books. Yeah, anything else? Any other recommendations? Those zines are great. Those seem really great for youth, yeah.
There's also an awesome anonymous zine called Hello. I don't know how you find it. Well, no, I do know how you find it. On the Anarchist Library.
Okay.
And if you want a zine format, I made a zine format, so you can email me or
cool.
give you the PDF or something.
Excellent. Thank you. We'll put that in the show notes as well. Yeah. Was there, well, first of all, is there anything else you want to add that you feel like you missed or?
Just little things, not about the last question, just anything altogether.
I don't think so. I mean, I'm enjoying this conversation. I want to add that.
Great. Yeah. It's been amazing. I love, there's things I wanted you to be on record, you saying, especially about the rights and stuff. So thank you. How can listeners find your work? What's the best way? Is it on social media or their website?
Oh yeah. I don't know. I don't know. Do I even do work that you can find these days?
Well, I guess solidarityhousing.com.
Yeah, solidarityhousing.com is a housing project that we didn't really talk about.
Nope.
But, maybe that's good. It's mysterious.
Go check it out, people. There's a great animation.
Is also any social medias finding you on?
Yeah, on Twitter, I'm Many Politics. I've been talking because I'm going to invite my students to do a blog instead of writing essays for this course that I'm teaching. And I was like, well, maybe I should do one. Why do they have to do one if I don't have to do one?
Nice.
And so maybe I have to do one, and I'll tell you what that's going to be called. Do you have a cool name for a doomer climate? The disaster.
Doomer with the humor. Sorry.
That sounds so bad.
It's so boomer. Oh my God.
Chris would find that great.
Bloom with the doomers. Doomers who bloom. I don't know. That's amazing. Yeah. Well, That's a nice way of saying that to me.
Yeah.
I do not like any of those.
I do not like any of those. Let's just brainstorm.
It's a brainstorm. It's fine.
Did you know, fun fact, this really made me happy as an introvert, that they've done tons and tons of studies that brainstorming with a group doesn't actually bring out the best ideas. And so ideation actually works best when people are off alone. But what they do when you do come together is that they grow and become even better when you're in groups. So it's really important that you give people time alone to ideate still, because there's this big, it's always the pendulum swinging and the binary thinking that, no ideation alone is bad. You got to do collective and collaborative. But it actually, people think better alone for like the big breakthrough ideas.
And then they go share it with people and then they brainstorm.
And that's when things can obviously grow and become even more incredible. But fun fact. That. Yeah. I know for me, I do better going off and thinking alone. So that's like why I didn't come up with a good name, guys.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I see you making excuses.
Well, probably in reality, in like a week, Carla will tell me the name that I'm going to use.
I do like to name things. It's true. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on. And I love your podcast.
Thanks. It's really nice having you here. Thanks for listening to our show. Grounded Futures is a media production and mentorship collaborative, and this podcast is produced by Carla Bergman, Liam Joy, Jamie Lee Gonzalez, and Melissa Roach. Our sound tech is Chris Bergman.
Yeah, thanks, team. And you can link to resources and transcripts, or if you want to donate some funds to our totally ad-free show, head over to groundedfutures.com, or you can email us with questions, recommendations for shows, etc. at groundedfutures@gmail.com. And please tune in next time to hear more from our incredible guests on how to thrive in the everyday.